So we're going to start section 4 of chapter 9 off talking about the various 55 delegates, sort of their makeup. On the whole, they were largely conservative. They were some of the more educated, well-off people in the colonies, mainly lawyers, merchants, shippers. Not a single one of them was a debtor. Not a single person among the 55 was a member of any of those debtor groups. On average, and I know this age seems kind of older to maybe you guys, but they're pretty young at the average age of 42. But for the most part, they were very experienced as statesmen go. Many of them had held pretty high-level public offices back in their home states. Very, very well regarded. By and large, though, their main focus, and you're going to see this in a couple of different areas as they sort of pound out this Constitution, is they're more interested in preserving this nation that they've carved out for themselves, rather than they are concerned about maybe preserving popular democracy or making sure that the people are empowered. In the end, they just want to make sure that everything that they had fought for in the Revolution is going to endure. And so they're looking for some type of political structure that will allow that to happen. They want a lot of things, and they want them all in the same package. They want something that is Republican in nature, that does rely on the will of the people to a certain extent, but they also want to make sure that our this American experiment is protected. So they don't want those 3,000 tyrants to run the show anymore. They want a central government that is going to be able to control trade, that's going to be able to control commercial endeavors through treaties and things of that nature. From all outside powers. They wanted to sort of get rid of this idea of mobocracy, whereby the masses just simply rule by chaos. They actually want to kind of curb unrestrained democracy. Democracy, when it's unrestrained, that's what gives rise to that anarchy that we talked about earlier. And finally, they're motivated by fear. There's a very real fear at this point in our nation's history where we might actually lose this nation that we fought so hard and so long to attain. Now, initially, many of the delegates wanted to just completely scrap the Articles of Confederation and start over again. Now, this is despite explicit instructions from Congress to simply revise. But they basically said, you know what we had in the Articles of Confederation is something that's very ineffectual. There were a few things that were positive, especially in terms of the land grants and things like that. But on the whole, we need to find something that's more authoritarian, and we need to transfer to this by a peaceful manner. And that becomes the focus very, very quickly. So there's a couple proposals to begin with. When you're looking at a legislature, when you're looking at a body that is going to make laws that are going to govern the country, there's two different plans. There's a large state and a small state plan. The large state plan is called the Virginia plan. The small state plan is called the New Jersey plan. With the Virginia plan, representation in both houses of a bicameral Congress. So the Virginia plan right off the bat is calling for a two-house, that's what bicameral means, two houses of Congress, and representation is going to be based on population. Some of the other things that are floated out there is either population or money, actually, that is given to the federal government to try to curb that idea of the large central government imposing taxes. That is scrapped fairly quickly, and it goes to population. Now, this obviously is advantageous to your larger states, Virginia among them, because they have more people in them. So you're larger both in terms of physical size, and because of being larger in physical size, also their population. This is not so good if you're a small state like New Jersey. So they come up with the New Jersey plan, which provides one house, unicameral Congress, and it's equal representation. Regardless of size, regardless of population, we're all in this together. We all should have an equal say. And this was a very, very bitter debate because small states feared that, they would be sort of, that we would see what's called the tyranny of the majority or the domination by a group of larger states. And so this is one of the major sticking points early on, especially for your smaller states. Now, what we come up with is what's known as the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise, because the person that actually hammers this compromise out is from the state of Connecticut. So basically, larger states, we would go with a bicameral legislature, whereby larger states would the lower of the two houses, the House of Representatives, would attain their members by population. So each state is going to have a number of representatives in the lower house or the House of Representatives based on their population. The smaller states then, they will occupy, the smaller states plan, that's where we get our second house, where in the Senate, every state will be represented equally. And you see the references there to the Constitution, which we will take a pretty good hard look at several components, but especially the Bill of Rights. And the third large agreement that oftentimes gets overlooked is any tax bill or revenue raising measure has to start in the House of Representatives, where the population, theoretically at least, has more influence. And that's to protect all of your citizens of smaller states. And this compromise breaks the deadlock right out of the gate that we have. So you have your Great Compromise. Now, the final Constitution, that was sort of the big hurdle. The final Constitution, we'll go over some more of it here in just a minute, was relatively short, because it relies on what's known as the common law legal tradition, whereby you have a common law that exists throughout the land. It also provides a sort of a flexible guide and procedures that allow us to change laws and to change this document as we see fit. And the original Constitution is just 7 articles, and it takes about 10 pages to print, which I know sounds like a lot to you guys, but in terms of creating a country, this is relatively small. It's relatively efficient. The president, which is established under the Constitution, has relatively broad authority. He is the head of the executive branch, so he can make appointments to different domestic offices. He has a say in who serves as judges. He has the power to reject or to veto any bills that are passed into law by the Congress. There is no power to wage war. That is something that is left to Congress. That is one of the things that even to this day the president cannot declare war. Now, the president's power has been expanded greatly in the past 200 years. So the president cannot declare war. He can get us pretty close to it, but he cannot put us in a state of declared war. One of the big things, and this is something that a lot of people are confused about, even to this day, and I will admit that today this seems rather silly, but you have to keep in mind that during this time period, this is one of those things, if you'll remember back a couple slides earlier in this video, we talked about how these delegates, these 55 delegates, politically apt as they were more interested in preserving this new republic than they were popular democracy. They were more concerned about simply preserving the nation than making sure that every single man, woman, and child, and really every white male who, had any standing at all in society, they didn't really, I don't want to say that they didn't care, that just wasn't their focus, that they had the right to have some say in this government. This is why we have the Electoral College. A lot of people ask today, when we elect our president, why do we use this thing called the Electoral College? Why isn't it just, whoever wins the popular vote wins? Well, this was one of those safeguards that our founding fathers put in to try to keep such an important decision. Deciding who the president of this country, the leader of this country is going to be, is a very, very important decision. And to try to sort of put a check on people that may not be as educated, people that may not be as, for lack of a better word, intelligent, enough to make this decision, this gives them an opportunity to have input and yet at the same time provide some type of protection against what might be perceived as a poor decision. And so we elect this president not directly, but rather indirectly through the Electoral College system. Basically, under the Electoral College, each state has a share of the presidential vote, and it's based on their total representation in Congress. So you take the number of representatives you have in Congress, which varies based on your population, and you add 2 because each state has 2 senators. And then whoever receives, and I don't remember the percentage. I know that today the number is 270. Whichever candidate reaches 270 Electoral College votes, that candidate wins the presidency. And there are other stipulations that talk about what happens with ties and things like that, or if nobody reaches that number. But that's the way that the Electoral College works. Not considered to be a super logical thing today, but during this time period, this would have made a lot of sense, and still to a certain extent today makes a lot of sense. Now, with regards to slavery, because your southern states naturally, especially with regards to this House of Representatives that's based on population, well, if we're allowed to count our slaves as people, we will have more representation in Congress, and we will have more of a say of what happens in this new federal government. So your southern states, they really want slaves to count, each slave to count as one person in the population count. Now, northern states, of course, see this, and they say, no, that's not right. You consider these slaves to be property. You cannot now consider them to be people. Just when it suits your benefit. And so what we come up with is what's known as the 3/5 compromise, where each slave will count as 3/5 of a person for representation. This is historically everything that our country does with slavery. There's no good way to represent it. There's no good way to look at it. This is a very demeaning sort of compromise even today. But this is the compromise that our founding fathers struck. The slave trade also is allowed to continue until the end of 1807. At that point, the slave trade in the United States is to stop. I think we'll stop there for this video because there's no way we're going to get through the next section. And in section 5, we're going to wrap this thing up.